Hey everyone, Mario again coming at you with another review, and as you can tell from up there, it is the first entry in my I Love the 80s series. And the film that has the honor of being the first entry is a film I haven't seen in a couple years, but had it in my collection for a while, and been meaning to rewatch it with an older perspective, see how the film has aged. And I have to say that looking at it now that I'm older, I will say I still enjoy the film, but I notice a few things about it that keep it from being, a full, perfect, undisputed classic. I will say I could see why this film could be considered a cult classic, depending on who you ask. And it is a film I really do enjoy. There's a few things I will mention that could have been improved upon, but when you look at the film's history, you could see why probably these problems are prevalent. The film, of course, is the 1985, I believe. Double checking real quick. Yes, 1985 film. Actually, its anniversary release date's coming up soon. It is directed by Wolfgang Petersen, and it stars Dennis Quaid and Louis Gossett Jr. Enemy Mine. And I just love the tagline for this film. Enemies because they were taught to be, allies because they had to be, brothers because they dared to be. Yeah, that's an epic tagline. Now, like I said, this film is, I guess you'd say, considered cult classic. It has IMDb,
which is the second highest of the scores. The highest score is its audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is 69, and is only 10 points higher than the critic score, which is 59%, which I can see more or less why it has those scores. There's not really any reviews by any big critics on here. Let me check top critics, see what they say. Also want to speak to them. Top Roger, he didn't like the film. His score was 2.5 out of 4, so it's basically a little more than just half of his score. Now, before I get into the film, I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about the production of the film. The film is based on a novella of the same name, also called Enemy Mine, written by Longyear. Now, the plot is the same for the most part, which, of course, I'll talk about the plot in a little bit. And while I haven't read it, apparently the novella has two sequels that when they were all printed together in a collection called the Enemy Papers. First there was Enemy Mine, then there was the Tomorrow Testament, which talks about another human named Joanne Nicol being captured by the Dracs. And she talks, basically it's from her point of view, talking about her life, capture, and personal growth. And of course it's basically about a first person writing something in the Holy Book of the Dracs called the Talmud. And then the last one's called The Last Enemy, and it's on the planet where the war between humans and Dracs began, and about a treaty about it. Which I have to say, that would be an interesting movie too. If the film had done better, they probably would have made a sequel based on that, but it doesn't say where it was, and I don't know specifically how different the final movie is from the novella. By a couple comments on YouTube, I've read that the ending is vastly different. That's probably the biggest difference between the movie and the book, but maybe one day if I'll get a copy of the book and I'll review it and I'll tell if it's right or not. I'll talk about what I heard the ending of the book is in a little bit. Now, the film began production in April 1984 with Richard Loncraine as the director, which that name off the top of my head I do not recognize. So I'll go check see what he's directed. He's directed Slade and Flame, Full Circle, The Missionary, Bellman and True, Richard III. More recently he directed Firewall and My One and Only. In television, Band of Brothers, A Gathering Storm, stuff like that. So he's an experienced director. Now, after about a week of shooting the film in Iceland and Budapest, producers became concerned over a variety of things, mostly budget overruns, poor daily qualities, the dailies, and of course creative differences. And I'm going to guess that the budget and the creative differences are probably the biggest worries that they had, and then looking at the dailies they're like, oh crap. Which
You guys know I really hate it when studios do this, but there are a few occasions where it does work. And granted, I don't know if anyone's ever been able to see the dailies for this film, because I don't even know if the DVD of the film even has any special features. But if it does it'd be nice for them to do a special edition of this film just so they could do a documentary on the making of it, and maybe show some of the dailies, because it'd be interesting to see what the dailies look like and see if the studio taking control of the film was a good thing or a bad thing. With it being Fox, it's kind of hard to tell, but then again, this was back when the people at Fox actually knew what they were doing. It wasn't until the 90s where they started to become egocentric. That would be the right word to use there. Now, of course, filming was stopped, and by this point the studio had already spent $9 million. Eventually the film would cost $40 million when marketing was taken into account, but the film before marketing was $29 million overall when they were going for like a $17 million budget, so it did overrun. Now, not only had they spent $9 million, but they also had pay-or-play contracts, which I'm gonna guess that was with Gossett and Quaid, because I know they're big stars overall, but off the top of my head, I don't know how big they were at this point. I know Gossett is an Academy Award nominated actor, and I think he might have won one, but I could be wrong. And I think this was around that time, so that's probably why. And I believe this is when Quaid's career was just kicking off, or this is where he was going to approach the zenith. Off the top of my head, I do not know. But I'm guessing they were well-known names enough to attract them both for this film. So, at this point, there were two decisions. They could either cut their losses and just scrap the film entirely, or they could go with a new director. And they decided to go with a new director. Partially because Fox changed its upper management at this time. They got a new chairman, Barry, that's an I, Diller. And they got a new head of production, Lawrence Gordon. And of course, they decided to go with a new director. They had faith in the story and the actors, and they hired Wolfgang Petersen to take over as director. Now, Wolfgang Petersen was an experienced director by this point. His two previous films were Das Boot and The Never-Ending Story, which is a childhood favorite of mine. And of course, since this film, he's directed a film called Shattered, which that was his first film since this one, because from after Enemy Mine, he didn't do another movie until '91, which is kind of sad, but I don't know if it's because of this film flopping or because of him not finding any interesting projects, or it could be a combination of the two. Then after that, he did In the Line of Fire, then he did Outbreak, and then Air Force One, which was his '90s success. Then he did A Perfect Storm, Troy, and Poseidon, and so far he hasn't directed anything theatrically since, which is kind of a shame. I like his direction style. He knows what to do with the camera, so it'd be nice to see him do more films. Now, Petersen scrapped all of the previous work and decided to start from scratch. And he moved the production to the studio where he had shot Das Boot. And because of the time it took for production to resume, they had to pay Quaid and Gossett holding money. And as this was going on, large sets were constructed, including a man-made lake. And according to the back of my copy of the VHS, designers utilized 7 of the facility's 9 stages at the location, and they even built a spectacular new stage dubbed the Wolfgang Petersen Hall after the film's director. So, listening to that, and when you listen to that and watch the film, you could really see that the sets they did a lot of detail on these sets, and it really does add to the feeling of the movie being on an alien world. So at least the money, at least from the look standpoint, was well spent. Though it kind of makes you wish they had gone with Wolfgang from the beginning, and they could have saved that $9 million that they wasted, basically. Now, another thing they did is they redesigned Gossett's Drac makeup, which, as you can tell, partially from my VHS, and also from looking at the back, that isn't what the Drac makeup ended up looking like. Now, it makes me wonder what the original makeup was like. Was it something similar, but just not as creative? Was it a completely different creature, like how with Predator they were going with a different design originally? So it makes me wonder that. Now, the marketing
was basically sort of a failure, obviously because of the fact that it was a flop, but, and obviously I don't know all the marketing, but I'm just looking at the original movie poster. People at the time were bashing this poster. I like this poster. It's similar to this, but different, but it's a nice poster of them looking at each other, and it fits with the tagline, which I've already stated. I think another reason the film might have flopped probably was the time it was released. It was released 5 days before Christmas, and I don't know if people are going to go see a sci-fi film 5 days before Christmas. They're probably wanting to go see more family films, like animated films. So they could have waited a couple months, maybe release it in maybe late February, March, maybe even April. Might have been a better decision, but I'm not in marketing, so... Anyway, the plot of the film is that it takes place in the late 21st century. Humans on the planet Earth are all at peace, which it makes you wonder, is this really is science fiction if humans are going to be at peace? But for the sake of the story, you go with it, and you never know, it could be possible one day to set aside all differences and actually be at peace, but it takes something to do it. Maybe a catastrophe. They never elaborate on how it happens. We just mentioned that they're at peace. Maybe it's something the novel goes into more detail on. Anyway, humans have gone into space to colonize deep space, and they find these planets that are rich in raw materials, but they are occupied by a reptilian humanoid race called the Drax. And of course, it begins a war, which they elaborate on a little bit in dialogue, because the Drax apparently have been there 1,000 years, and they see the humans as invaders, and the humans, you know, trying to annex the territory, so it's, you know, matter of which perspective you're looking from. Now, the battles are fought in spacecraft, and this is where you really see the special effects for this movie shine, and watching it, it really makes me miss practical effects, you know, model work, and then even map paintings, and all. So, like, we still have technology, we should be able to do this more. I mean, I think CGI can work well in certain things, but for a scene like a space battle, it's just that the models add a bit of realism to it, because it's actually something in front of the camera, so it adds to that look. And the special effects in this film, they kind of have like a 50s vibe to them, which I don't know if that adds to the tone or feel of the film, but it adds a little bit to the, I guess adds a minor nostalgia value to watching the fights. Just something I might want to note. Depends on who you ask, I guess. Now, during the space fight, we see at the beginning, we are introduced to our main character, one of them anyway, human pilot Willis E. Davidge, played by Dennis Quaid. And at first, we only hear his voice, but we are also introduced to our other main character, Drac pilot Jariba Shagan, Louis Gossett Jr. They're members of a dogfight, and they eventually crash land on a planet that has a breathable atmosphere, water, and natural fauna. And of course, at first, they're hostile to each other, which, considering that they're at war, that's believable, but they don't manage to kill one another. Which I'm not going to go into detail on it, but let's just say it makes you question a little bit. It's like, okay, they're at war. Why didn't Jariba just kill Davidge? I mean, he has the chance. He has the upper hand. He has a blaster weapon. He could just zap him. But my guess is, with how the character, we see him throughout the rest of the film being sort of philosophical, my guess maybe it's just a personal thing. And also, when you look at war, especially if it comes off all of a sudden, it's going to be sustained for a while. We haven't done it recently, but maybe he was drafted and he's not really much of a soldier, and even though even if it is a enemy, he's going to not kill him right now. And also maybe the fact he sees it probably better to keep him around in case he's not picked up right away. If he is, they have a prisoner of war, so you never know. Could be thinking like that. That's just my guess anyway. It's never elaborated on. I don't know, maybe it's something they overlooked because of the production history I've gone through, but at least that's what I look at it. Now, eventually they learn to cooperate to survive, and they begin to work together to build a shelter for protection, because the planet is known to have meteorite storms every once in a while. It never explains why, but I'm going to guess that the system this planet's in probably has a lot of meteors coming around. Maybe a moon was destroyed, or another planet or something. It's never really explained. It's just a little quirk the planet has. Now, as you can expect, at first the two are kind of semi-hostile towards each other, but as they start to spend time around each other and begin to learn each other's languages, it's just like slow, like Jariba slowly picks up English, and it's a good performance by Gossett because he believably sells the fact that the character is not a native English speaker, especially at first when he's speaking it, saying it very slow and weird. Same thing with Quaid with Drak, maybe mispronouncing words or not saying it with feeling. So good performances on that part, and I don't know if it's a combination of the writing and the character and the actors actually having a semi-good rapport with one another, but you really do sort of see the friction between them, but as well as the fact that they're only cooperating with each other out of necessity. And they also have some good back and forth, like a scene where David just finished building his shelter, and then Jariba just looks at it, and the one word he says is shit. Shit? What do you mean shit? Not solid. And David just goes over to it and kicks it. Solid. It falls over, and then when he looks at Jariba's just like it's like stuff like that. Which brings me to another thing about the film, is that the way time flows in this film is a little weird. It makes me wonder if that's how it did it in the novel. Of course, in the novel it's going to have the added thing of actual written exposition to explain it, whereas in this film it only has narration every once in a while. The only thing that really shows that time is passing a lot is the fact that David's facial hair keeps changing, which I think that's a little interesting thing to show the passage of time. Then again, everyone's facial hair grows differently. I mean, Jeff's facial hair grows a little longer and faster than mine, but then again, as you can tell from mine, this is only a new attempt thing. I've mostly just grown this, and of course this occasionally, but it's a nice little indicator. The only time it really becomes confusing is later at the end, which is probably my only major problem with the film, which I'll get to in a little bit. Now, eventually the two become friends, and we find out a little bit more about the Draks, that they actually are similar to us, at least religious-wise, which I thought was a nice little touch. I mean, it shows, I think that's one of the holdovers probably from stories like this being set on Earth, which, well, you always see that in some sci-fi stories, so it doesn't bother me. But then, eventually something happens with Jariba, or as David calls him, Jerry, which I'm not going to spoil, but then it goes into a thing involving a young Drak, and then of course leads into the ending, which is where the film's kind of has a tone clash, whereas the first half is kind of philosophical and has an allegory tone. The last part of the film kind of has an action vibe, which the tones clash, but it doesn't bug me that much, because I can understand why the tone is like that. Partially because, if you were in a situation where someone you cared deeply for was enslaved like this, you would go and do that too. And of course, it actually has a pretty good line from Quaid. Yeah, trouble. What trouble? Where? This. Probably messed up the line, but it is a pretty good line. And I like how he changes the voice and all that. And of course, we get to see some more Drak makeup effects in there. Now that's the part that I hear is different from the book. From the book, I hear we get to see the Drak homeworld a lot more than what we see in the movie. We only see a brief shot at the end. If there's anything I think the film could have had more, is it could have dealt a little bit more with maybe some bigotry and culture clash between the two, because we do get a little bit of that, but we could have had more. I think probably if you had a little bit more lines of dialogue during the couple times where they're arguing, like one scene where David tells Jerry that his wise man is full of shit, and then Jerry goes back and says something about Mickey Mouse without realizing he doesn't know Mickey Mouse is just a cartoon character, which I guess is supposed to just be for, culture clash humor because of how David reacts to it, just turning and laughing, and Jerry just looking like, huh? I think it would have worked better during the scene where they're arguing with one another about the semantics of the war. We annexed it! You invaded! Like that would have been a good scene to have a little bit more of the bigotry, and then, them looking at each other. Then maybe in the scene before, maybe a scene where Jerry gets philosophical and is talking about that the difference between them are mostly just one's of bigotry. Because I think the moral of this movie, it's very underlying. It's one that if you watch the movie and you think about it, you're like, I can see that.
think the moral of the movie is that bigotry and hatred are things that are taught. They're not inherent to a person's nature. Like, for example, a baby is not going to, like, using humans for example, a white baby and a black baby are not going to hate each other naturally. It's going to be something that they're going to have to be taught. So, in that regard, that's where I look at it, something like that being more probably nurture instead of nature. Granted, sometimes some humans distrust the unknown, but that's different. I wouldn't put something of a different race or something as the unknown. Maybe in this regard that might explain the human bigotry towards the Drax and vice versa, but after years of actually seeing each other, they'll realize it's just something that's taught, which the film could have done a better job of conveying that message, like through dialogue or something. The ending does get a little bit of it, but it's not that much. It's very subtle in the ending. It's mostly when they realize that when the other Drax realize this is the human that the one Drax there, Zombies, has been talking to him about. Zombies, I'm not going to spoil his plot thing within the movie because I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen it. Now, this is probably going to be the only spoiler in the film. I'm not going to lift up the thing because I actually think this is one that people should actually hear if you want to go watch the movie if you haven't. If there's one thing in the movie involving the whole time thing that I just look at it and go, what? They couldn't have explained this? Is that at one point in the movie, Quaid's character gets shot and he's left for dead. Now, how they could think he's actually dead, the thing about him being thought dead and then showing he's not dead, that's a cliche that's seen 1,000 times here. Not really an explanation for why he's thought dead, my guess. Just a Princess Bride line pops into my head there. Turns out Dennis Quaid is only mostly dead. There's a difference between mostly dead and all dead. But with mostly dead, he's slightly alive. All dead, there's only one thing you can do. Loot his body. He wasn't all dead. They tried to loot his body. He interrupted it. Some more terminology there. Now the thing, after getting past that, is that they see him speaking Drac and think that he might be consorting with the enemy. And then it kind of skips ahead a little bit and he basically is returned to his rank and all that and he's all cleaned up. It's like, did I miss a scene or something? Was a scene cut out? Was a scene not filmed or something? There's another reason I want to read the book, because if there's a scene like that in there, I want to find out, because I didn't really catch it the first time I watched the film, but the second time I'm like, okay, this is a little weird how it's jumping ahead, and then rewatching the film, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a big problem. That's the only major plot inconsistency I noticed while watching the film. The rest of it, it's just because of the time flowing weird, and of course Drax aging differently than humans, which I thought was interesting. It makes sense considering they're asexual reptilians. Reptilians age faster than mammals. So it's like, really, you couldn't have filmed that? Was the budget already going over too much so they had to just come up with something? If that's the case, they could have refilmed dialogue, but I do like that they give a minor explanation for why he'd be returned awake to his rank. It's quick, and it mentions that one of his former friends stuck their neck out for him, and that's about it. So I'm guessing, about a month or two has passed, probably because he's healed from the gunshot wound, and the other guy's face is healed, so I'm guessing only that. Now, is it a film I recommend people watching? I'd say if you're a fan of 80s films and you're a fan of sci-fi, this film is worth one watch out of curiosity. If you like it or not, that's probably going to be dependent on your taste. But it's a film I could say I do love, despite the few problems I mentioned, the minor one and then the one big one I have with the film. And like I said, it's not a perfect film, but for me it is an entertaining film. And even though it doesn't carry through with the purpose 100%, I do like that it at least tries to do a message about bigotry and tolerance, and that it's something that's taught, not inherent. Hence why I like the tagline. So for that, my rating for Enemy Mine is a 4 out of 5 stars.